Well, Razorback fans, the Arkansas baseball team has finally taken the field for some actual fall ball action against themselves. But we finally got some takeaways to get into, some players that have stood out, some names you really need to know, and just overall opinions on this Arkansas baseball team rather than speculation. And we will be talking about the first two scrimmages of fall practice on today's episode of the Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, so opinions can sometimes vary on how important practice is, how important these fall scrimmages are. And for those that aren't familiar, fall practice is what I view as a very valuable time to really figure out what you've got as a baseball team, which is why they do it. I know DBH is a big proponent of getting out there and scrimmaging and just putting these guys in game situations and seeing what they're made of. And for me personally, as someone who's covered the team and just watched the team and been a fan, observer, journalist, reporter, I've always found a lot of value in it. And that's really where you can kind of start to figure out where the cream rises to the top, And so I always like to get out there and just see what these guys are made of. And it's only two scrimmages. So I want everyone to take that into account as I talk about some of these guys and who have stood out. And maybe if someone hasn't and you're a little worried about that, it's two scrimmages. We're going to continue throughout the fall to dissect each scrimmage and kind of what's going on and who's standing out, some of the notable developments. But you can usually tell when there's a blue chip guy that's like a legitimate draft prospect. Like you can usually tell early on. It doesn't take that long. I would say Hagen Smith fits this category. My first year really officially covering the team was a 2022 baseball season, so the fall of 2021. That was Peyton Stovall's freshman year, Kendall Diggs' freshman year, Hagen Smith's freshman year, and it took one outing. I watched Hagen Smith throw one inning, and I was like, oh, all right, they've got something here. And it's not because I'm a brilliant scout or anything. It's because talent like that usually shines through. Heston Kjerstad is the same kind of thing. As soon as he got on campus, it took about 1 week worth of fall scrimmages before everyone started figuring out, hey, this kid from Amarillo, like they've got something there. Caden Wallace fits this description. I would also throw Tavian Josenberger and Caleb Cali both in this category of guys that it didn't take long. You can just tell by the way they carry themselves, the way they go about their business, and obviously what they do on the field, the way they swing the bat, the way they just handle pitching, all these things. You can usually tell pretty early on when there's a guy that really sticks out that clear. It's usually something you shouldn't ignore. And guys, I got to start with Brent Iredale, who has been a very for the time we've been doing these bombastic editions on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. I feel like I've said Brent Iredale's name 1,000 times, and I know the first episode I did, people were really upset that I didn't mention him because he was a huge part of the MLB draft and why Arkansas had a successful MLB draft. One of the big keys was getting this guy to campus. And for those that aren't familiar, we'll just refresh you once again. Brent Iredale is from Aussie. You got an Aussie on the roster. There's a lot of international flavor on this Razorback team, and we'll talk about a little bit of it. But he's from Australia originally, went to JUCO at New Mexico Junior College, and hit 25 home runs this past season as a sophomore, and was honestly viewed as a top 5 JUCO draft prospect. Now, of course, JUCO is not the SEC. JUCO is not, high-level MLB baseball or anything, but when you have a guy that hits 25 home runs, I don't care what level of baseball you're playing, like that's notable. And again, he was viewed as one of the top prospects in all of junior college baseball. And frankly, for most of the season, when I'm kind of thinking of Arkansas's roster and trying to project it a year forward, he wasn't a guy that I was involving in that, where I was saying, oh yeah, you just lock that guy in at third base. Because frankly, I thought he was talented enough, and based on just kind of the things that you hear, the things you read, and how highly this guy's been viewed by other guys, other scouts and such, and things of that nature, if you will. It didn't seem like this was a guy that was probably going to go to campus. I don't know what his number was, what his signing bonus was, but he decides to, hey, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to test it out. I'm sure he didn't come to college for free. But guys, it has not taken long. He reminds me, imagine Caleb Cali, but a little bit toolsier version of Caleb Cali. And when I say toolsy, I'm talking about physical tools. Like his power is probably just a little bit on a different level than Cali. His athleticism, he's a really good athlete, which Van Horn actually spoke about him last week in the press conference and saying he's a better overall athlete than they thought. They knew he was a really good hitter. but the power is on a different level than they expected. He's a really good athlete speed-wise. He stole third base in the scrimmage this weekend off of a freshman left-handed pitcher, but still stole third base. So, I mean, like, you don't – it's hard to do that if you're not a pretty good athlete. He's a big dude. He's like 6'2", 215, 220, looks the part. He will catch your eye right away. And guys, I think he's going to start at third base. The first swing I saw from this guy was against Gabe Gackle. Take some yard. First, I guess he wasn't the first one to do it because Charles Davon led off with a home run against Gabe Gackle. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. But Brent Iredale, they had him hitting in the middle of the order, which again tells you a little bit about how they feel about him. But he hits a home run off of Gabe Gackle. Hits an opposite field double off of Jack Smith later. Then in the Saturday scrimmage, which took place at 9:30 a.m. So like pretty much nobody was able to be there for this one. But shout out to our guy, Parker Harrison, who's helped us out at Inside Arkansas, is helping out with Best of Arkansas Sports for going there and kind of getting these stats, getting everything compiled for all the nerds on the beat like me and Andrew Hutchinson and a few others and Daniel Shee. But Brent Iredale hits 2 home runs in the Saturday scrimmage. So through 2 games of his Arkansas career, again, very unofficial, fall ball against his own teammates' stats. But Brent Iredale, 4 of 6 with 3 home runs and an opposite field double. Everything comes off his bat like 108. Like he's just one of those dudes where if he's making contact, it's going a long way. So the home run he hit off of Gackle only went 365 feet. So not like a mammoth long shot, but he hit it 110 miles an hour, which I remember a couple of years ago during the 2023 season, 110 miles an hour was like I think Jared Wagner hit that mark once. Arkansas had 1 batted ball the entire season that was that high. And I think they had a couple last year, maybe here and there, some ones. But the next home run he hit was 420, 106 miles an hour. So he took a little off of it, but hit it further. And then he finished it up with a 397-foot shot, hit 104 miles an hour. That is something that you're just going to have to get used to hearing these metrics of these home runs of what he's hitting. And for those that just don't understand the context of that, like anything over 100 miles an hour is you're smacking that ball. And yeah, once you get into that 110 range, you're talking about elite bat speed, elite exit velocities. And I think that's also it's a pretty stable metric. If you're hitting the ball extremely hard off the bat, regardless of how much contact you're making, which by the way, he doesn't strike out much. I've not seen him strike out yet. He makes a lot of contact too. So it's not like this guy who's going to be super boomer bust or anything like that. Again, I was a really big Caleb Cali fan. Like if anyone was following my work at that point in time, I was raving all off season about how I thought Caleb Cali was going to be awesome. And it took him a little while to get there, but he ended up hitting, almost 300, had plenty of power, even not being in the lineup every day, still hit double-digit home runs. Like, I feel like he kind of lived up to that billing. And I'm sitting here now, and again, I'm not a scout. I'm not someone who, I'm not like making decisions for MLB teams, but I imagine Brent Iredale, it's not going to take long for folks to realize that Arkansas has something special in him. And for now, I mean, look, I'm even going to go as far as to say I think he might be the best hitter on Arkansas's roster right now, day one. I mean, he's a junior, so it's not like he's a child or anything. And I don't even know if that's a hot take. I'm sure other people have probably said similar things, but I could not be more excited to watch Brent Iredale at Arkansas, and I think you guys should be excited too. I mean, you got an Australian on the team. There's going to be all kinds of jokes all year that we get to make. And speaking of that, I talked about Caleb Cali, but Vahiva Aloy is another one where it didn't take long for us to realize, hey, Arkansas's got something here. This kid's really, really talented. And I spent all offseason raving about him too. And even if you were a little bit disappointed with what Vahiva Aloy produced in his sophomore season, I think you can agree that we're talking about a next level talent that's going to have a lot of success and play baseball for a really long time. And now we are going to talk a little bit more about some of the other standouts in the scrimmage on today's episode of Locked On Razorbacks podcast. So stick with us after a quick break. Folks, I want to talk to you about Gametime, the ticketing app. I love Gametime. I've been using it for years. It's that time of year, whether you're going to a concert, whether you're going to a sporting event, you're going to see Arkansas UAB, maybe you went and saw Creed in concert last night. Gametime makes it easy for you. They take out all of the weird unknowns and the guessing of ticketing. And if in the Gametime picks, their curation makes it easier to save money on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. How often do you see that where you say, oh man, these tickets, $30, no big deal. And then you end up getting to that checkout and you see $12 fee, $17 fee, the convenience fee, whatever. Gametime, if you have the Gametime picks toggle on, this feature on, it will take out all of that weird unknown. What you see is what you're going to have to pay. You also get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, which is nice. You get the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. In Gametime ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app today, create an account, and use the code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that is Locked On College. Okay, so just moving on a little bit to some of the other guys that stood out in this one. I want to start by touching on a couple guys that we talked about on last week's show, Nolan Souza and Ryder Helfrich. Again, when you're thinking about this Arkansas roster and what it's going to look like next year, I feel like those are two guys that people don't talk about as much because, we've seen them. And I know some people, they had their ups and downs as freshmen. You might think, okay, I wasn't super impressed by those guys last year. Who can we get? Who is someone better than them? These are two big X factors on the team. And I think both of those guys, the coaching staff is kind of counting on them taking that next step forward and being legitimate everyday dudes. Ryder Helfrich, what he did this summer, if that's any indication, like Arkansas is really not going to have to worry about that. And they might have something special at the plate, behind it, and at it as a hitter, hitting 10, 11 home runs in the Cape Cod League, clearly getting on base more, making more consistent contact. I think both of those guys through, two games, 2 fall ball scrimmages that are very unofficial. But I think both those guys look like much more improved versions of the really talented guys that we saw last year. I mean, there were flashes from both of them, Souza in particular, where you thought, man, this is like one of the best hitters on the team. This is a real X factor, real dynamic player in the lineup. Nolan Souza's first at-bat of the fall. Again, I'm talking about Gabe Gackle, who we know is a very good pitcher. We saw how good he was as a freshman. He gives up 3 bombs in the first inning. The first of which, again, to the transfer, Charles Davon, who I will talk about in a second. But he gives up an opposite field home run to Nolan Souza in a 2-strike count. Souza hits the ball 108 miles an hour to the opposite field, hits it over the left field wall. I believe that home run went over 400 feet too, which is pretty impressive. I mean, like that alone is just impressive stuff. When you're a left-handed hitter with the size and athleticism that Nolan Souza has, when you're hitting the ball with authority, with that much authority to the left side of the field, it just tells you how talented this kid is. And, there was times last year in his freshman year where I would feel like he would almost hit a ball and it would still go 102 miles an hour. Or sometimes he'd hit a home run opposite field. And it's like, I don't know if he was necessarily trying to do that, but he's just so talented, so big and strong that he's able to make it happen. I really liked what I saw from him from an approach standpoint. I believe he took at least 2 walks in the first 2 scrimmages. And he's pretty patient at the plate overall. I mean, there were some times where he would strike out looking and you're like, oh, man, you're a little too patient. But he didn't look like a kid that was like a 19-year-old sophomore who's overeager, trying to prove himself, knows he's potentially in a position battle with a transfer in Camden Koziel and maybe a few other guys. Nolan Souza looked super confident at the plate. I mean, the tools, again, I say that word tools a lot, but when we're talking baseball, we're talking about projection. You're going to hear that a lot. But with the tools with Nolan Souza are clearly there. I was really impressed with him. He did make an error at second base in the second game, throwing error. I'm not gonna lose too much sleep over that, but I guess we'll monitor it throughout the year. But I think just at the plate, Nolan Souza appears to have taken that jump that you want your freshmen to take in their sophomore years. The kind of jump that Kendall Diggs took, and Kendall Diggs, by the way, did not play because he's again nursing his shoulder injury. He probably won't play at all this fall, and we'll see how he's able to get back in the swing of things in the spring. But Kendall Diggs took that kind of jump as a freshman because we saw a lot of promise from Kendall Diggs as a freshman, but he hits about 195, and it's like, all right, can he do it every day? Then as a sophomore, he hits 299 with 12 home runs, leads the team in RBI and stuff like that. And so that's the kind of progression you want to see your guys take. And I feel like Souza and Helfrich, and Souza hit 2 home runs in the first scrimmage. Helfrich, I believe, just hit the 1, and then he also had a huge 2-run single. But both of those guys really looked like what you would expect them to look like and what you would want. Like if you were going into the scrimmage and you're like, hey, I really want to see if these guys have made that progression. I mean, you're going to keep your eye on them. You would have been pleased with what you saw from both of those guys. And I've mentioned Charles Davon, which by the way, I've said his name weird a few times. This kid's French Canadian. He's from Canada originally. Went to Florida Gulf Coast last year for his freshman year. Had a really nice freshman year. 284, 10 home runs, 13 stolen bases. A lot of prospects really like him. Now he's a small guy. He's like 5'8", 5'9". Frankly, he looks like a baseball player. Like what baseball players used to look like. Nowadays, baseball players are like all 6'3", 220, Shohei Ohtani types or Vahiva Lloyd types, Giancarlo Stanton. But Charles Davon, he looks like, just kind of like that scrappy dirtbag college baseball player. He and Rocco Pepe, Rocco Pepe, by the way, did not play in the first scrimmage. I'm not sure what that was going on there. I don't know if he was just banged up or if he had a prior obligation or whatever, but I did not see him. I don't know if he had something he had to do. But he went 2 for 2 in his first scrimmage, the transfer from Fresno State, who also played at Long Beach State. I know Rocco Pepe's an interesting name that a lot of fans are intrigued by, and I'm intrigued by as well. It looks like he's off to a nice little start as well. And so we'll see if he's able to lock down an outfield spot. But I definitely think Charles Davon is going to be a starter in Arkansas's outfield. If you were to ask me, I would say it's probably going to be in center field. And he hit a home run off of Gabe Gackle as well. Hit an opposite field double off of Tag Andrews, the freshman. And so I was really impressed. He also drew a walk and I think he scored 3 runs in that first scrimmage. Now the second scrimmage was a lot less offensive, and I believe Davon went 0 for 3 in that one. A lot of people. There was 11 home runs hit in the first scrimmage, which was a 6-inning scrimmage, and you also had pitchers only throwing 1 inning. So it's not like it was like, oh, this pitcher threw 4 innings and then he wore down and then they hit him pretty well. They scaled the pitchers back a good bit in terms of how they use them and how they disperse everybody only threw 1 inning, and that'll increase as fall goes on. So if you feel like I'm not giving enough breakdowns of pitchers so far, that would be the reason why. And I did want to talk about some of the other transfers who frankly like didn't do a ton this weekend. It's not because they're bad or not because like we should be worried about them or whatever, but I feel like there's a lot of people who are kind of wanting to know about some of these guys. But Justin Thomas, Logan Maxwell did not have a hit. Kuhio Aloy, Vahiva's brother, he did not have a hit, but I will say he looks the part. And I know DVH spoke highly about him last weekend. Camden Koziel, the transfer from Vanderbilt, who I'm really kind of intrigued by. I feel like he's another one of those X factor pieces in the lineup as a sophomore who had a pretty solid freshman year. He was a big time recruit. He did have a double, but him and Michael Anderson as well. Michael Anderson coming from Rhode Island, the guy who I said is very boomer bust. He hit 13 home runs as a sophomore, 10 home runs as a freshman, but strikes out a good bit. We'll see if he's able to work his way into that first base mix. He's going to have to beat out Reese Robinette, who also hit a home run this past weekend. Everybody hit home runs this past weekend, just about. But Michael Anderson is a transfer that I'm keeping my eye on. Him and Camden Koziel, I feel like, have a good chance to crack the lineup, but neither of them really stood out this weekend. And Logan Maxwell and Justin Thomas, those are 2 guys that are going to be kind of in that mix for the outfield spots with Davon, with Rocco Pepe, with Kendall Diggs if he ends up coming back and deciding to play outfield. But I also wanted to touch on a couple freshmen who really caught my attention this past weekend. Brenton Clarke, a true freshman outfielder who, frankly, like, I'm not saying like I, didn't want to watch him play, but like I didn't really consider him a factor in the outfield conversation. He comes out and hits 2 home runs in the opening scrimmage, one of which is off of Will McIntyre, who, has given up some home runs here and there, but like a veteran pitcher for Arkansas who you would think would probably have the leg up on a freshman making his first appearance against college pitching. So I thought that was really impressive. Quite the statement for Brenton Clarke to make. And Gabe Frazier is another one, the infielder who's playing some shortstop this offseason, is really the only true freshman infielder that Arkansas has. I was talking to a buddy about him the other day, and I was like, man, if Gabe Frazier ends up being good, I really don't know what Arkansas does. Because you've got Nolan Souza and Camden Koziel. You kind of need to find a spot for both those guys in the lineup. Obviously, I feel so highly of Brent Iredale. I feel like he's a lock to be in the lineup. Michael Anderson, Kuhio Aloy, Reese Robinette. Like, these are all guys that are fighting for position in the infield. And, of course, you've got Vahiva Aloy kind of locked down there at shortstop. So I'm like, if Gabe Frazier ends up being a real difference maker, it really throws this whole thing for a loop. And, guys, I'm not saying he is or he's about to do that yet, but, I mean, he looks like he's ready to contribute sooner rather than later. He hit a home run off of Carson Wiggins, name that we've talked about a good bit on this podcast. Left-handed hitting infielders are always going to be intriguing. Gabe Frazier looks like Arkansas might have something there, and he's really good in the field. Really good in the field. So if something were to happen to Fahiva Aloy, I actually think he might be the guy that would fill in there at shortstop. I want to touch on a few pitching performances before we get out of here. Won't take too much of your time. So stick with us a little bit longer on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. Guys, I want to talk to you about FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook, and we have a little something different for you here from now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. NFL Sunday Ticket is the best way to consume NFL football. I mean, I was watching Red Zone all weekend this past Sunday. If you are in a fantasy league or you're betting or whatever, you're just a fan of the sport, NFL Sunday Ticket is the way to go. So make sure you're taking advantage of this awesome deal. Also, if you're a Razorback fan and you think the Razorbacks are going to bounce back this weekend against UAB, the line is up to 24.5. So they're it opened around 20.5, 21.5. But I think people have started to do the math and realize this is going to be a lopsided affair. So get in on that line before it moves too much. And with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime, which is key. Just visit FanDuel.com, America's #1 sports book. Again, that's FanDuel.com. Also, go ahead and place your little bet on Sean O'Malley. He's definitely getting the job done this weekend. Again, use FanDuel's #1 sports book, or America's #1 sports book, FanDuel.com. Okay, so just before we get out of here, wanted to touch on a few big pitching performances. Cole Gibler, who is the freshman pitcher that, frankly, he was another one who was, like Carson Wiggins, in that mix of will he sign, will he go to campus? Like, we don't really know. But I feel like he's flown under the radar a little bit. And I'll admit, like, I kind of was more intrigued by Carson Wiggins, of course, because of the Jackson Wiggins aspect. We know his brother. We know how talented that family is, and it's just easy to let your imagination run wild. But man, Cole Gibler, the freshman left-hander out of Texas, gets the start in the second scrimmage of the fall. Which again, we're saying start. They all throw 1 innings, not a big deal. The other starting pitcher in the game was Ben Bybee, who again is a guy who started games here at Arkansas. But the fact that they even put him on a starting situation at all tells me a little bit about how they feel about him. And geez, man, he struck out the side, and that side included Fahiva Aloy, Justin Thomas, and Nolan Souza. So it's not like he faced some bums or anything. That's legit stuff. And I think that's one to monitor. I can't wait to see him this week to see if he gets a little bit more extended of an outing. But that's another one where if you're looking for a freshman arm to kind of burst onto the scene, it looks like Cole Gibler is kind of the front runner right now, and it tells you that they like him a good bit. Gage Wood looked really, really good. Again, 1 inning. I believe he walked a guy but had 2 strikeouts, threw a ton of strikes, looked really good. Dylan Carter, who came back last year, back from his Tommy John surgery the year before, and looked pretty good. His velo was up, but you could tell he wasn't quite as sharp as he'll likely be throughout the rest of the actual season. But Dylan Carter, was good to see him strike out a guy in his outing the other day. Looked really solid, threw a ton of strikes, was spinning that breaking ball. He and Parker Coyle, who also had a nice little scrimmage in his 1 inning, made a really nice defensive play. But I was sitting right behind home plate, and I could see Matt Hobbs' little iPad here. And I hope I'm not revealing too many trade secrets, but I was noticing Parker Coyle was spinning his breaking ball 3,000 RPM, which, again, I'm talking spin rates here. I'm talking weird stuff that some of you guys are probably like, what is this loser talking about? To put it into perspective, the average spin rate for a big league breaking ball is like 2,700. And Parker Coyle spinning his breaking ball 3,000 RPM. If you were wondering, hey, why do they keep giving this lefty that throws 91 chances in these games? That's why. I think he's going to be a legitimate weapon in these left-on-left matchups. Dylan Carter was also spinning that thing 2,800, 2,900 every breaking ball. That's big-time stuff. And with him now, he's throwing 96 after his Tommy John surgery. Like, that's notable stuff. Another pitching performance I wanted to touch on, and I was really excited about this one, Josh Hyneman. If that name doesn't sound familiar, it's because he is not quite yet he made his official Razorback debut, but he's a, redshirt sophomore now at this point from Jonesboro. Leading up to his freshman year, was pitching pretty well in the scrimmages. I remember the last scrimmage that he threw in going into his true freshman year, he was 7 up, 7 down, looked really good, threw a ton of strikes, was throwing in that low 90s range, 91, 92 range. Velo was up a little bit more in that 93, 95 range the other day. But he had Tommy John surgery, which unfortunately kind of set him back after redshirting as a freshman. He ends up just not being able to pitch at all last year due to Tommy John surgery. But he was back, goes 3 up, 3 down with a couple of strikeouts. He was the only Razorback pitcher to do that in Friday's scrimmage. So I thought that was awesome. Josh Hyneman, in-state kid, getting back on the mound. We'll see if he's able to work his way into a legitimate role. But guys, that's all I got for you today. And I look forward, again, we're going to continue diving into some of these fall ball scrimmages and giving you the latest word on who's standing out, who's good, who's bad, who's doing what. And it's going to be a lot of fun, man. And don't forget, Arkansas versus Oklahoma State. They're going to be playing the Friday before the Tennessee game. I believe that's like October 5th is that date, but it's that weekend. They're going to be playing a 2-game exhibition series. So if you got nothing else to do, go out and see your Arkansas baseball team play baseball. And if you follow me on Twitter, I will be tweeting out when Arkansas has their next scrimmages because they don't really announce them until the day of. But I look forward to being out there next weekend or this weekend. And I look forward to talking to you guys next week about all the action. I appreciate you for tuning in to this week's edition of the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, Bombast